Hello guys, good afternoon. So I'm so happy to be here with you for one more class and for one more opportunity to learn more about American literature. I just prepared the fourth class, and so hopefully you like it and hopefully you get to understand the main topics for today's lesson. So I just wanted to say hi. Before I go to the class, please make sure you watch the video that it's highlighted important instructions that is in the online cafe section. So that's going to be very important for you to understand it. So if in case like you haven't watched it yet, like go and check that first and then you come to this class or you do it later. Okay, so let's start with our presentation. Hold on. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. And hopefully, yes, hopefully we get the screen. Okay, great. So make sure this is American literature, guys. Make sure this presentation says session number 4, July 30th, okay, 2020. We're gonna start with this and hopefully it's shorter, the whole presentation from the previous one, but it's going to be around half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that. So the topic for today is the first years. I'm going to try to go slow with everything because you suggested me that to slow down with the explanation. So I'm going to try to do that today. Okay, requirements for the class. So as usual, you're going to make sure you already watched the previous session, which is early European explorers and writings, okay? And also make sure you complete the Native American literature activity. You still have 1 week, right? So don't worry, don't freak out about this. Remember that you have to answer core question number 3. And you also have to fill the form, the survey that is SwiftQ's survey number 2. Always, as usual, I always ask for great attitude to learn and your attention and participation in the activities. Respect, please. That's the last condition. Okay, the class objectives and rules. Well, basically it will be the objectives. I gotta change this template. We gotta analyze the first years of American literature. We're going to start covering this topic. So who were the settlers, the writers of the first years? Previous class, we were studying some of the first settlers, but now we're going to go more in detail about the most famous people who came to the United States on what is known now as the United States. We're also going to apply a compare and contrast. I'm sorry for this. We're going to make contrast T essay to literary and historical elements. 2 things that we're doing today. Okay, as usual, we're going to get this quote by William Bradford. This call for much thankfulness from us all, which we purpose, the Lord willing, to express in a day of thanksgiving to our merciful God. Okay, basically the reflection of what William Bradford, this is the guy. So, and William Bradford is one of the biographies that you can have in the American Literature Plus activity about the video review. So there's this guy that you can review for extra credits if you want. But the reflection is probably the single most resonant event which took place during the period covered by Bradford historical account is the first Thanksgiving. So today's lesson, we're going to talk about a little bit about Thanksgiving. Probably you're familiar with that. Today, of course, El Día del Pavo, that's Thanksgiving, Turkey's Day. Today, of course, almost the entire country effectively shuts down, except for football players, store clerks, and street cleaners. And it's truly America's national holiday, huge in the United States. One of the most ironic displays of modesty and understatement in the literature of the New World is displayed above in Bradford, only reference to the feast that began it all using the name which is now applied. So this is basically Bradford giving his word on Thanksgiving. So they took the Thanksgiving word from Bradford and they applied it to the holiday. An interesting fact about holiday and an anecdote. So people usually get the turkey, right? The animal. They have a fancy dinner and all the restaurants are booked and full and all people are celebrating with family and everything, right? So my experience with Thanksgiving, probably some of you already experienced Thanksgiving in the United States, but my experience from Thanksgiving, it's eating a turkey burger at McDonald's because, you know, everything was so full. Dinners were so expensive. I mean, like a table for a dinner, it was almost $100, $150, depending on the restaurant. So I was like, with my friends, I was like, no, I think we're gonna go for a burger. So that's the celebration, but it's huge. And remember that you had the Thanksgiving, and I think that after that, the next day, you have Black Friday. So it's crazy over there in the United States. 2 days are crazy. And then you have the Cyber Monday the next week. Insane. It's insane. It's all about consumption, guys. But originally, this tradition was in order to think about the health. We're gonna study this later. Okay, so let's take a look at the first years here. Just to mention some types of writing, we have the chronicles of European explorers, and we've seen this with Champlain, if you remember. We've seen this with Cabeza de Vaca from previous session. We've seen this with Columbus. These are called chronicles because they chronologically explain what's been seen in a sequence of events, okay? So that's why they're called chronicles. A lot of the time it's diaries, a lot of the time it's observations, but the chronos from chronicles, it's an important thing because it's supposed to be an observation. Writing down this is what I've seen. What I see and what I interpret by the person, or what is interpreted by the person that's writing. That has a big effect on what's produced. So the result depends on the person, because my writing or the way I see or perceive something is different to the way you might see the same thing. So the way I write about something is going to be different to the way you write about something. So then we got the captivity narrative. So we got the captivity narrative, which is a recount, which could be true or it could be not true. I mean, there's many cases where we're going to see there are people that are captured and they write about it afterwards, but this is sort of captivity narrative. In the beginning is usually true, but as they are rewritten and rewritten during the Romantic period in the 1820s and 30s, the captivity narrative, once again, it's something that picked up in a different, it's different, right? With times. It different with times, with movements, it changes from country to country, but you're going to have the captivity narrative during this period, even in Latin American countries, in Latin American writers, they wrote from the perspective of, I'm in prison, this is what's happening, this is the reason I got captured, and this is what happened to me. So captivity narrative is a big thing during this period. Spiritual autobiographies. This is an interesting section. At the beginning, I told you that we will not have too many autobiographies, but a spiritual autobiography at the beginning, it's important because it does have a certain pattern that's followed, and we're going to look at that at the pattern later. So, but it's spiritual autobiography is huge during this lesson, and you're going to see why later. But it's a person that basically say, I've sinned, I'm a sinner. Then they find their way out of sin, they find God, and at the end they show that they become a good Christian. So this is an example of a spiritual autobiography we're going to see, and we're going to see this with the Puritans and Pilgrims later. And we also have poetry and drama. These are works that are approaching to the novel as a genre. So the novel itself, if you think about the novel itself, people will tell you this is true or not true, but some people mark Cervantes' Don Quixote as the first novel written. That was 1605. It was the first book, and 1615 was the second book. So when that was written in Spain, that type of genre makes it way across the ocean eventually, and people will be writing later on novels as we will see it later. But at this point, it's, as the previous session, it's all about journals, chronicles, diaries, and in this part is more about captivity narrative and spiritual autobiographies, poetry, from the perspective of some natives and some people living there, and drama. Some of you might ask me, teacher, why didn't we study a lot of native literature before this time of the new settlers, or before Cabeza de Vaca? Because as you effectively commented, as the document, I'm sorry, as the document expresses, the Native American literature at the beginning was more about oral transmission. So you don't have a lot of writing. I don't think you have any writing at this point, because all the stories, all the folklore was transmitted orally. So that's the reason why we didn't touch any literature from the native at this point. Okay, so we're going to continue. Let's take a look at a little bit of historical background in here. So we got the Pilgrims and the Puritans. These two terms that are often confused are going to be the center of the discussion today. So here's some basic information on them. Some information is good to separate one from another, because they do, on the base of their ideas, there's some difference on that. Like they separate their own ideas and thoughts. And even though they have some similarities, they do have some big or major differences. Okay, let's continue. So here's a replica of the Mayflower. I kind of mentioned it previous session. So if you wanna expand on how the Mayflower actually look, you can go to this link and you can watch the video. It's 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but it's very interesting to get a replica of that, to see how it was, how the people were traveling back then. Most people, when you think about boats and stuff related to this, like, you know, what are the first boats that we recall, we think about? I think at least I remember Columbus boats, were La Niña, La Pinta, and La Santa Maria. And I remember those even before I started studying languages, because, like, you know, or American history, because we grew up with the La Niña, La Pinta, La Santa Maria. Even it was a mandatory question in the social studies course during elementary. But this is very interesting. You know, the Mayflower, the time is 1620. So we have that over there. And a lot of people can trace their root back to the Mayflower, even in the United States. For example, in Boston, that is in Massachusetts, Boston City, state of Massachusetts, you got a blue blood clubs, and all of that, and the people that can trace their roots all the way back to the Mayflower. And it's just people with deep genealogy back into Europe. So you have a lot of Bostonian. I know, like, a lot of people that have this connection to the Mayflower, and it's very good to be considered for many people like a true Bostonian in that sense. People that first came here, we're the same, the heritage of the first settlers. So in Boston, you have a lot of this sense of culture. And Boston is one of the most beautiful cities. If you get the chance to travel, and if you get the chance to go to the United States, and you want to know about the history of the United States, go to Boston, go to Philadelphia, Virginia, all of these eastern states. So very nice cities over there. So, okay, Let's continue. So the Pilgrims in the 16th century, just to give you a little bit of background on it, um, Henry VIII of England split from the Roman Catholic Church and created the Church of England. Now, if you think about this, it's kind of in the southern. This will take a really long time to explain it, but at least in Europe, at this point, you could see the southern part of Europe is going to be Catholic, and the north part of Europe is going to be Protestant. And this actually travels around the world at some point, because you can see over in the United States, we got the Protestantism in the United States today, and a lot of the Catholicism is still in the South. Central America also Catholic, South America also Catholic. So it seems like Catholicism, it's a thing of the South. Even in Europe, you have the Portuguese, the French people, you have the Spanish people, all the Italian people in the South, and then you have England, Finland, all of them are Protestants in a way, or some sort of roots of the Protestants. And same thing happens in Asia. You know, a lot of the north countries are Protestant or different religions. Newer Protestantism in the Philippines is actually, I would say that 98% or 95% Roman Catholic. Remember that Philippines was a colony of Spain, so that's why the influence of Catholicism. So this is kind of interesting historical background in here. So a global thing is northern will be Protestant and south will be more Catholic, just on that. So the Puritans in England went over to the New World kind of laterally, and the separatists in this sense, what we're talking here is the separatists didn't believe the king should head the church and broke off. So the separatists will be here, the Pilgrims. So previously you had a Catholic England church, and then these people basically pushed to have a more Protestant ideal of religion, or idea of religion, if you want to say it like that. Okay. So basically, they thought anyone could worship. So the Pilgrims in here, they thought anyone could worship God and read the Bible in their own way. They didn't want to be scripted exactly about what needed to be done, how it needed to be done, and how they needed to believe. So they wanted this freedom. They wanted this space. So where do they find this space? They thought about, let's go somewhere else. Let's go to the New World. So at first it's because of religion. They wanted to have freedom of religion, or to have a different or kind of beliefs, and to be free to believe in something different to the Catholic Church. But they also wanted to get rich. So that's the other side. They wanted to have freedom of religion, and they also wanted to get rich. And they knew all of the previous settlers, because the Pilgrims were not the first one. Remember, the first settlers, you have Virginia over there, but the Pilgrims, if you think about it, they are not the first settlers to the New World from Europe. So they knew about how rich people were getting there, the land that was free, and you know, the many opportunities that you could have. So they wanted to have that also. So William Bradford, it's part of the Pilgrims, led the Pilgrims toward Virginia. They wanted to go live down in Jamestown, but they end up in Massachusetts Bay, and landed in Plymouth. Plymouth is going to be a very iconic place later in this conversation. In 1620, they came over on the Mayflower, like I mentioned, and Mayflower will be the boat, okay? And the Plymouth will be the place where, in the Massachusetts Bay, where they landed, they arrived. Let's move on. So for the pilgrims, the first winter was so difficult. Imagine the north and the north being so cold. So for them, it was the winter being so difficult. They didn't have the resources, they didn't have the protection, they didn't have the infrastructure. They basically knew nothing about it. So it was very hard. But the Wampanoag Indians helped them. And this is probably a story you know. And this is the most celebrated holidays in the United States. I believe Thanksgiving will be the most celebrated holiday, Thanksgiving. But it actually traces back to how the Massasoit, their leader, their leader helped them through the first winter, and aided by Squanto, helped the pilgrims to survive. So this is a way of thanking the natives, the British people. Now they are American people, new settlers. They thanked them in a way of celebrating. It was a feast they had. So that's the reason Thanksgiving, the name of Thanksgiving. So yeah, so this is the origin of the first Thanksgiving. Okay, so this is Plymouth Plantation, as you can see. You can still visit today, and it's very, you know, it's a reconstruction. A lot of the houses, and they try to make it look like the way it should have looked back then. So I never been to this place. I would love to go here. But you can have, I wanted to add a video from YouTube if you have time. It is like a virtual walk through the Plymouth Plantation, and you have the stories. This is a very interesting video to get the contextual and historical background of how it looks and where they live. And as you can see, it's a bay. That's why it's a Massachusetts Bay. So it's near the ocean. Cute. That's very nice. Okay, so I would recommend you to go and click on this video after the presentation, watch the video, and you know, learn a little bit more about the pilgrims. And now we're going to go to the other side, it's the Puritans. The Puritans didn't want to separate entirely from the Church of England. This is opposite to the belief of the Pilgrims. So the Pilgrims did want to separate from the Church of England, but the Puritans didn't want to do it entirely. So you got the bifurcation there. There's a little fork there where the Pilgrims are going to believe this, and the Puritans are going to have a different way of doing the things. So it's basically the same group of people coming from the same country, but thinking different, and they wanted to make things differently, and they didn't want to separate, but they did want to have reforms. So this guy came into play. So John Winthrop led 1,000 people to the New World and set there in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which it was the start of the Great Migration from England to the New World. So this guy was the first one bringing 1,000 people to the New World. One more time, Massachusetts Bay Colony. That's why nowadays Massachusetts state, it has a lot of historical places over there. And what is considered a true Bostonian is basically a person that in the roots of the family or the previous relatives were part of this group. So that's considered a true Bostonian, that they always live there. All their relatives, previous ancestors live there. So that's if you ever heard about the true Bostonian, that's the concept. That's the definition. So basically they follow a strict adherence to the laws of God, and based on their colonial government and the base of the colonial government was basically these laws, the laws of God. You know, when you think about the Pilgrims, when you're in the United States, and people in elementary school, and I remember I did a volunteer program with elementary school over there, and people will dress up as pilgrims in Halloween, for example, or Thanksgiving. And people say, oh, let's dress up as the pilgrims. People think pilgrims, first people to arrive, they dress up in special outfits because it's all connected to Thanksgiving. But when you think about the literature and the connections between the heritage, the people, the literary heritage we have today really comes from the Puritan strain of that we're gonna take a great look on that and see what that influence was, because they went all the way through and influenced many of the things that were happening in here. Like I mentioned, like the Puritans and the Pilgrims, they basically were the first notion of what American will be. And these type of writings, it's the basis for some of the future writers. For example, it influenced, so in here we're talking about the influence of the Puritans and the Pilgrims in literature. So in literature later on, Nathaniel Hawthorne's writing were influenced by the Puritans and the Pilgrims in the 800s. So you have these people being in the 600s, and then writers were telling stories in the 1800s about the Pilgrims. And an example of this is the Scarlet Letter. So it's very important to see the connection here. Hopefully I'm not going too fast, guys, but I want to balance the time and balance my pace and my ideas for you to understand. So, but we're talking about the Puritans in here at this point. So this was influenced by the iconoclastic Swiss theologian, John Calvin. And we have the concept of Calvinism here and Puritanism. So this connection here is very important. If you want to know more about the connection of Calvinism and the Puritanism, you can go and search on Google, and it's a very interesting perspective of life. So you guys want to go there? Because of time, I cannot stop here. Okay. So let's see here. We got John Smith, and this is the guy, John Smith. Probably at this point sounds familiar, the name, John Smith. It's a very common name in the United States. I don't know for what reason. Well, I know for this reason, probably. So he was an English explorer, 1580, 1631. So he was a leader of the Virginia colony, which was the first permanent English settlement in North America. Now we're stepping back here a bit because obviously this section 1620 and on, but when we think about the writing, this stuff, the stuff he wrote was later, was after that. So when his father died, when John Smith's father died, he was able to start traveling, something that he always wanted, but couldn't do it because of his father teaching him some of the stuff of a real man, quotation key commas. But at a point that his father died, he was able to start traveling because he didn't want to continue his apprenticeship. So he was an apprentice, so he didn't want to continue that. So he had enlisted in a couple of different armies. He was connected to fighting against the Spanish at one point. And he joined another regiment, and he was captured by the Turks. And actually he got away by, if I recall correctly, by killing his master and fleeing back to England in 1605. So 1605, it means he was 25 years old at this point. But anyways, when he arrived back in England, he promoted migration to the New World. So he's a promoter of, okay, let's go. He went to England and said, okay, guys, let's go to the New World. There are many opportunities over there. So he wrote a number of books, of which his most famous is the General History of Virginia, New England, and the Summer Isles in 1624. So you can take a look at this book, which was written to get, basically the main purpose of the books was to get people to go over, because keep in mind that Christopher Columbus and a lot of the other explorers we're just going to, we're not just going to explore. It was for financial reasons. So it's not something that you say, oh, it's a hobby for Christopher Columbus. It's a hobby for this explorer. So he came here because they saw the richness and the resources and the land and the opportunities and the colony that they basically had. So John Smith was a promoter of this. So he had some investors that gave him some money, and he brought some people over, and all of this is all about, it's all about making money, guys. So basically say, oh, let's go, but you need financial resources. So let's go, you pay me, I get you there, and then you see how you manage yourself over there. Settling in new places, yes, to have religious freedom, but there's always commercial interest in here. So if you think about the Pilgrims and the Puritans, oh, they wanted to have freedom of religion, because in England they felt they were not free to believe what they wanted to believe, to read the way they wanted to read. But at the end, it was religious purpose, but it became more commercial interest, because they were not fools. I mean, they were getting rich, so they thought, let's do this. So part of these people believe that a lot of these were used as propaganda. So you can have the first writing of propaganda by the new world. Well, it was not really propaganda, but they were used. So they were used. So people would be interested, and they could learn about the general history of Virginia and New England. So they will become curious, and maybe they want to go over and live there by themselves. So that's the story of John Smith. So he had this book, The History of Virginia, New England, and the Summer Isles, as a way of saying, okay, I cannot take a picture of where I live, so I'm gonna write a book, and I'm gonna tell these stories, and I'm going to get some financial people in here, finance my trips and finance my, my exploration, but I need to paint a good picture. So he started writing literature to show it to the old world. Okay, so now probably you're more familiar about this guy. So he's probably most well known, however, for his own story about him. He was taken captive. So we have the captivity narrative in here. So we have captive by the Chesapeake Bay Indians, and then they freed by the chief's daughter Pocahontas. Probably something you are familiar, guys. And this is the book that I was mentioning before, the general history. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. I apologize for this. So this is the story that we had, the general history of Virginia, New England, and the Summer Isles. Most known because of Pocahontas, because of the chief's daughter, and you're familiar probably with Disney movies. So this story has been retold many times, perhaps most famously by the 2 Disney movies in her name. Like I said, some scholars question the veracity of it, but this is something that he wrote himself, and he's trying to go back to back it up with some facts. But these people did exist, and apparently that even took place. So, at the beginning I said some of these captivity stories can be true, some of them can be not true. So you have the story of John Smith telling the captivity, but we don't have any evidence other than people existed. So there are records of people calling John Smith. And just for your information, guys, so I think I've seen Pocahontas by Disney once or twice, I don't remember. But at the end, Pocahontas married John Smith. But in real life, it wasn't like that. So Pocahontas didn't marry John Smith. She married John Rolfe. And John Rolfe was basically the secretary and the recorder of the birth certification at a point in the colony over there. So it's interesting. One interesting fact. So Pocahontas didn't marry John Smith, married John Rolfe. They had a baby. So, and you have John Rolfe, that is the secretary of the major municipality or colony over there in Virginia. And he's in charge of the birth certifications. And as mandatory, everyone has to register in their names, their newborns and the babies. But his son didn't appear in the records. Pocahontas' son didn't appear in the records. And one of the reasons Native Americans and people, I was reading some articles about this, one of the reasons was because Pocahontas was raped. It was not a consent marriage. Well, it was, but you know, after the consequence of Pocahontas was raped, he got pregnant. So because these people were religious and they believe in God, so they have to marry. And you know, it's a sad story. If you want to know more about the true story of Pocahontas, I'm going to leave a link in here. It's a good practice for your listening skill. I decided to bring this one because you are going to learn about Pocahontas' story, but you're also going to practice your listening skill. So this is supposed to be a Pocahontas, the real one, not the one that is, I didn't bring one from Disney, but you know how Pocahontas from Disney actually looks. Okay, guys, so this is basically everything that I wanted to share about the Puritans and Pilgrims. Okay, this is more about your literary journey and more of your professional writing. Compare and contrast essay. So we're gonna talk about compare and contrast essay because it's what it is. It's a comparison. You know, you compare similarities and differences. For example, you have an example in here. You have two dogs and you can notice the two differences. So when you think about comparing contrast, it's a rhetorical style that basically discusses the similarities and the difference of two or more things, ideas, concepts, items, places, and so on. This rhetorical style is one of that you'll see often as a complete essay, but you may also use it quite a lot within paragraph of any kind of essay, in which you need to make some kind of comparison to help illustrate a point. Okay, so because your homework is going to be related to this, you're gonna write a compare and contrast essay, but I'm going to explain later. So this is the definition. This is like basically the essence, comparing two things or more things. And then if you want to know more about this, if you wanna deepen into this one, there's a video over here. You can click, go and learn more about it. A compare and contrast essay does two things. It discusses the similarities and differences of at least two different things. First, you must find a basis of comparison to be sure that the two things have enough in common. After that, you identify their differences. You may structure the compare and contrast essay using either the alternating method, which basically means stating one aspect of one thing and immediately discussing the same aspect of the other thing or the other item and how they are similar and different. So if you're using the alternating method, it means you are giving the idea of one and then the same idea, but related to the other item, idea, or concept, okay? Or there's this other method that is the block method. Basically, it means discussing all of the aspects of one thing and then discussing all of the aspects of the other thing. So you have two options here. The way you can write a comparing contrast essay, it's giving the idea of one and then following with the other one, or you can write everything, everything about one thing, in this case, it will be about the Pilgrims or the Puritans later. I wanted to share with you some comparing contrast props. So use the following frames when you draft a paper or prepare to speak. If you're writing a paper in this case, or you're preparing to speak, you know, it's going to help you for both. To open, you have some example. For example, the similarities between blah, blah, blah and blah, blah, blah indicates that, or by comparing the Puritans to the Pilgrims, it becomes clear that a comparison of the, you know, or to compare or contrast. Although Pilgrims and Puritans are, and you give the idea, or Pilgrims is blah, 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 whereas Puritan is, or the most obvious difference between Pilgrim and Puritan is, or you want to support your ideas, you can use the same, this one. One similarity or one difference is their common characteristics include this, this, and this. To close, by comparing Puritans to Pilgrims, we learned that blah, 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 or the difference between Puritans and Pilgrims are important because blah, blah, blah. So this is going to be very useful for you to write your essay. That is going to be your homework. Class recap, very quick in here. With the Mayflower, basically, we see the interaction of new settlers, Puritans and Pilgrims, with the new land and natives. People coming because they wanted freedom of religion, but at the end it became commercial purpose and financial purpose. And they developed differently because some of them, the Pilgrims wanted basically full freedom, but Puritans wanted only reforms of what they already know about religion. And they developed differently and they have different interaction with the natives. So your homework is going to be to research a little bit more about both of them because that's going to be part of your homework. Think about some of the main points of this lesson, guys. As always, what did you just learn? And then about the compare and contrast. A compare and contrast essay basically does two things. It discusses the similarities and the difference of at least two different things. That's it. Homework. Based on everything we've studied about the Puritans and Pilgrims, you're going to write a 500 words comparative essay, similarities and differences about these two groups, Puritans and Pilgrims. Okay, so you're going to write an essay, but imagine today, basically you have 1 week. No, basically you have 2 weeks in order to write the essay because next week, from the 1st of August to the 7th of August is holiday. So basically we don't have classes. And then you basically have Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday because the homework deadline is before this class, so Thursday class. So on Wednesday, it's going to be the 8th, 9th. On the Wednesday, the 10th is going to be the deadline for this. So you basically have 11 days to complete the essay. I think it's enough. And the core question for today's lesson is, how did the arrival of the Pilgrims and the Puritans shape the New World? I want your opinions on that in the Gazette section. Make sure you commented on it. Make sure you watch the video I posted earlier about some instructions. And I want to know your opinion because your opinion is relevant, your opinion is worthy, and your opinion is graded. And as always, guys, you're gonna have Swift cues for this lesson. Hopefully you like it. Feel free to comment anything. I'm replying to you. I'm giving you feedback of your feedback to my class. Okay? So I like this interaction of everything building the knowledge and me adapting the class. Okay, guys, this is everything for today's lesson. I'm gonna start recording. Okay, in here. Have a good one, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day. Start doing homework, organize yourself, don't procrastinate. Bye, take care.